Salve, salve galera, chegamos aqui na Motorsport TV Brasil com mais uma entrevista especialíssima. Eu, Carlos Costa, na companhia de Guilherme Longo. Abrindo aqui, vocês já veem Jonathan Nubble, editor de Fórmula 1 do Motorsport.com e da Autosport em nível global. Vamos falar em inglês com as legendas aqui, claro. Vocês vão ver que tem bastante assunto interessante que a gente vai abordar ao longo desse bate-papo. Jonathan, first of all, it's very nice to have you here. How many times in Brazil?
Oh, too many to count, actually. I first came here, I remember in 1996, when the International Touring Car Series, I covered that championship, the first big international series I covered in Formula One. And yeah, crazy weekends. Bizarrely, one of the standout things was I remember I was with a photographer friend in our hire car, and he was zooming around the streets and he managed to spin it at the roundabout near the old Transamerica Hotel. So I remember us spinning across a roundabout in the wet. But Brazil, I love this race. One of my favourites of the season. You know, some people
Top 3, top 5?
Top 3, I think. Just for everything. I think it's got, I mean, Interlagos, I think it's a fantastic track. It looks beautiful, great for racing, always causes incidents, always gives good races. The city is crazy, can be difficult to get around, big traffic. But I think it's an adventure, and I think a lot of Formula One places are very kind of getting these venues are clinical. This place is an adventure. It's got great food, great atmosphere, great fun, great track. So
by now you must know this city quite well. What do you know in the city rather than just the track?
Although we know the city quite well, it's still that kind of life in Formula One where it's hotels and racetracks. So we normally stay somewhere you know, near Morumbi, just 'cause it's quite easy to get into the circuit. So, you know, we know Morumbi Shopping Centre, we know some churrascarias, and actually I know Fogo de Chão's were the famous one that all the teams go to, but actually there's some other better ones, a bit less low profile, just as good food, just as great places. Yeah, just it's all good. I have stayed at the Transamerica a few times in the past when Bernie Ecclestone used to kind of fly in his helicopter and disappear out. So yeah, lots and lots of happy memories from this place.
The cemetery in which Senna is. Yeah, there's a lot of things to go to in Sao Paulo. Guilherme, go ahead. First question for Jonathan Nubble.
Jonathan, you were talking about first time here in 1996, covering Formula One specifically. When was your first Brazilian Grand Prix?
So this is why getting old gets me really bad. So I can't remember. I'd have to look back, because I mean there are some journalists who count every single race they've been to and know it off the top of their head, but I've never done it. I should do it. I think it was in 2000. I'd have to look back, because I did most of the races in 1998, but I think I didn't cover this one back then. But so it's kind of early 2000s first coming here, which obviously peak Ferrari, you know, Schumacher's glory years, and obviously Rubens when he was around, and you know I got to know Rubens really well over the years. Always a you know friendly, happy chap, always decent to speak to, and obviously you know that famous 2009 race where for that little bit on Saturday night it looked like he could grab that championship until it all turned around on the Sunday.
You actually got to see some very key moments in the history of Brazilian Grand Prix. We had 2003, the Fisichella accident, 2007, Raikkonen's championship, 2008, Lewis, 2009. So what do you pick as your top favorite races moment during these years of covering the Brazilian Grand Prix?
Not just races, moments. I think it's...
But I find in life, actually, sometimes that there's like really random things you remember. Like I remember in 2007, so the year Kimi won it, the media centre used to be above the pits. And on Saturday, they painted the steps all the way up to the media centre. And I got paint. I had some new trainers I bought in America and bought here, and they got covered in this blue paint. And for years afterwards, while they were still wearable, I'd have this blue paint, which I'd always look down at and go, oh, that's Kimi Raikkonen's title thing. And I always had the confetti, if everyone remembers, that they fly off in the podium. You know, I grabbed a piece and it was in my wallet, always from Kimi's 2007 championships. There's always these random little moments. So I remember 2007 walking out of the track, and we were discussing, you know, the championship had happened, but there was the controversy over the fuel issue.
Yes.
Which came up. So you remember that moment. But I think 2008, 8 has to be kind of the standout weekend, just because, stunning weekend from Felipe. Brilliant performance. The heartbreak for him of that final lap. I think we only saw afterwards the emotion that Ferrari pits. But I think the way he stood up there on the podium, truly professional.
Yes.
Absolute sportsman. Total emotion from him about, he knew what he'd achieved. He knew how close it had been. So I think that's probably the one that stands out. When you look at past races, whenever the 2008 Grand Prix kind of a short replay comes on, you're always watching it, and just always remarkable that it comes down to this final corner.
It's funny because here in Brazil, we actually know, we remember the commentators, what they were saying at the moment, but we also know the English commentators. Is that Glock is something that
Yes.
we talk about till this day.
And actually, Glock was here for a guest race in Stock Car Brazil alongside Felipe Massa, which was quite fun as well.
Yeah.
But I think this is what kind of sport is about. It's these emotions, these random moments that you cannot predict, and why stuff suddenly kind of takes off and becomes really, really massive. And other aspects of the sport, there'd be hundreds of races that, if people ask me what happened at this race, I'd struggle to recall, struggle to probably even remember for definite who won this one or how the race was battled. But there are other kind of moments in your life and races you go to where you think, oh yeah, I remember this happening. And I think Brazil probably got more of those memories that really, really stand out compared to a lot of other places.
And you mentioned Interlagos in your top 3. What are the other top 3 tracks? Silverstone?
I'm not a huge fan of the modern Silverstone. I think it used to be fantastic with kind of the bridge corner, and the old. I think the old layout. Even going 2-3 generations back in the late 80s, early 90s. I think the track then, I much preferred it. I don't like these slow corners and little kind of complexes and little things. So. I don't like that. So you've got Interlagos. Lots of venues have lots of reasons. They've all got different reasons for liking them. Monza for its atmosphere and history always stands out. Monaco's Monaco. You just can't beat a Monaco Grand Prix weekend, no matter how difficult it is. It's always there. Spa, every time you go into track and you look down and you see Eau Rouge and the Climate to Radion, you cannot stop being in love with what this place is. So I think there's just lots and lots of places, but Interlagos always puts a smile on my face.
And still using this Brazil link, let's put it that way. We mentioned the 2008 Grand Prix, and now Massa has this legal case against Formula One. What do you think about this, John?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you can see why he feels that the championship was wrongfully robbed from him. And the circumstances and the questions over whether there was a cover-up or not. And it was also quite interesting because when that case came out, we worked on it with Eric Gabriel. We ran the story, and then we were thinking this is quite interesting. And I recall this Charlie Whiting video interview that I'd known about 4 or 5 years beforehand that I'd seen, and it wasn't at the time wasn't really a story because I thought everyone knew this. So the next day we ran this story about, Charlie Whiting actually said this and revealed that more details and all this would happen. And that's actually what then triggered Felipe to go,
Yes.
oh, actually, there's more to this than I thought. And then it kind of spiraled from there. But I also think it's a very difficult thing in a sporting arena to base circumstances on. If this one race had turned out differently, it wouldn't have impacted the rest of the season. So even if Felipe had won that race, then potentially other races would have turned out differently. And I think you can't do it in sport. You can't go back to say, we'll take a goal away from Brazil in a controversial quarterfinal somewhere, and then that means they win an extra World Cup. I don't think it works. Yeah,
the what if question in this sport is really difficult to answer.
Yeah, because you never know how people behave and react is always based on the circumstances they have at the time. If Felipe had come out of Singapore with the win, maybe McLaren would have attacked those final races in a different way. So the circumstances wouldn't be the same. So you can understand why he's upset, and you can understand why he feels injustice has been done. But unfortunately, life's not fair sometimes. And sometimes circumstances that have got absolutely nothing to do with you can derail everything. Just as, Felipe Massa was not in control of what tyres Timo Glock was on at the end of that race, or when Lewis Hamilton would catch him. So there are certain circumstances that, unfortunately, you can't control.
Do you see any comparison between the crash gate story, what Massa is doing now, to Abu Dhabi 2021, or not?
Because we
comparable?
had Toto Wolff making comparisons about it. Last year, he said that if Massa won, it could set up a precedent for the future and considering 2021.
Yeah, but I think that is the kind of the Pandora's box you opened, that if you start deciding that this race was won because circumstances weren't ideal, then it changes X circumstance and Y circumstance, and you end up in a situation where every championship is won in a different way. I don't think you can't go back, and unless there was crystal clear evidence of a team had cheated, or blatant, this team 100% cheated and they've confessed and admitted it, then you might have a circumstance to go back and reflect on a championship, just as they do in Tour de France with doping or anything.
Yes.
So there are some circumstances where perhaps you can go back. But I think in a sport as complex as Formula One, and events go in your favour sometimes, they go against you sometimes, and just as Felipe feels hard done by Crashgate, and Mercedes feels hard done by and will feel hard done by forever for what happened at Abu Dhabi. This is the way the day was handled, unfortunately. And some days circumstances go in your favour, some days they weren't. Some days you're unhappy, and some days you're really, really, really unhappy. And I think Mercedes and Hamilton will never ever get over what happened in Abu Dhabi. But there's no way you can't go back and
change history. Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because we talk about how Massa deals with the crash gate.
Yes.
And we also can talk about how Hamilton deals with Abu Dhabi 2021. I'd like to ask you actually one specific thing about this, John. We heard sometimes, that there was a gentleman's agreement to end the races in green flag. And in a way, Michael could argue that. And did you hear anything like that in the paddock back in 2021, or in his time ahead of the role of race director?
I think there's often, because Formula One team managers and team bosses regularly meet with the race director. And I think there are certain pressures that exist.
From all of the teams.
From all the things, even if whether they're conversations, whether they're formalised. I don't suspect that that Michael Masi had a distinct order from anybody to say this race must end under green flag. But I think there was probably, tremendously difficult circumstances, huge pressure in a championship fight. Because when things get intense, as they are getting this season as well, with technical controversies and the fights between Lando and Max, there's huge pressure to make huge decisions. And when two teams are at war and two drivers are fighting each other in such a way, it can get very, very difficult to handle it, because you're competing with these huge pressures from both camps. We saw it in Saudi Arabia, the controversy over, asking Red Bull, where do you want Max to have the restart position, which was kind of unfathomable. So you're battling these endless compromises. So I think they're probably, in Michael's head, he probably felt that we need to get this race restarted, and they rushed it, and they didn't follow the procedures. They made mistakes, and it wasn't handled in the way that
lapped cars and so on.
With the lapped cars, with the timing it takes from the lap cars to go to when you can restart it. So mistakes were made. Were they made deliberately in a conspiracy to help one side over the other? No, I don't think so. I think it was human error on the day. It swung a championship, and for a competitor, I think it's probably the hardest thing. If you lose a race because you've messed up, it's one thing. If you lose a race because your rival did a brilliant job and did something better, it's another thing. But if you lose a race because the sporting authority made a mistake, I think that's much, much, much harder to handle. I think it happens in football a lot as well, doesn't it? If a goal passes and a referee says it's disallowed or is allowed, and that swings an entire match or a championship, then these things happen. I think that's the hardest thing for any competitor to face, is when they've done the right job, their competitor hasn't done the right job, but they still lose because the regulator got it wrong.
And thinking about the future, do you think that this Abu Dhabi 2021 controversy will have an impact on Max Verstappen's legacy when, I don't know, 20 years from now or something like that?
I don't think Abu Dhabi, because Abu Dhabi 21 was nothing to do with Max. Max and Red Bull played.
He just benefited from
that.
They
played the game brilliantly, and ultimately it came down to that final safety car call, and it was Mercedes' decision: do we pit or not pit? Based on the number of laps that were remaining, their calculations of when lapped cars should be going, and the calculation of when the race would likely restart, Mercedes actually got it right, because it wasn't going to restart, and if they had pitted and Max had stayed out,
track position,
and the FIA had done the job properly and followed the regulation to the word, we'd all be sitting here now going, can you believe Mercedes made such a foolish mistake? So, there are these elements. Abu Dhabi 21 wasn't, I think, what defines Max. But I think what is an interesting comparison between 21 and now is how Max Verstappen deals with his title rivals. Because 21 was all about his obsession with Lewis Hamilton, getting his elbows out, showing he wasn't willing to back down, was willing to risk getting into a collision if necessary. You go up against a rival, and do you intimidate them? Lewis showed he wasn't going to be intimidated. And when two drivers are willing to take the risk of not being intimidated, you get collisions. And we're seeing that again this season. We saw it in Lando in Austria. We've seen it in Austin and Mexico too. So I think this is how Max Verstappen deals with a rival, is that his focus is on winning, doing what it takes to win, going absolutely up to the limit of the regulations, maybe a little bit over it sometimes to push it. But Max is just 100% focused on the win, and the win matters more to him than how he wins it, I think, in some respects.
And he won't change his approach despite what FIA says or whatever.
I think Max reads the thing. If we go back to Austin,
I don't think he should change his approach. Just to be clear.
Go back to Austin, for example. A lot of other drivers were well aware that the driving guidelines very much favour you getting to the apex of a corner first. Mm-hmm. Pretty clear. Other drivers know that Max was doing this, and I think only we became more aware, and the public became more aware, and fans became more aware of what was happening because of Austin. When Max, easing off the brakes, get to the apex first. You then can sort it out, but everything's then in your favour. So, but this is following the rules. Rule book says get to the apex first. It's pretty much your corner. It doesn't matter how you get to the apex first. If that means you ease off the brakes to get there slightly ahead, if it means launching up the inside to do it, this is what it is. If the rules say something else, Max will shift his focus 30, 40%. But in his head, he races to what the rules say, and he goes absolutely 100% to what they say. Whether it fits in with sporting fairness or equity, or being completely equal with who you're fighting against and thinking we're both racing on the same terms, that's a different matter. Because I think what Lando Norris would be willing to do is probably not as hard as Max Verstappen, but equally, Max has got the luxury of a comfortable points lead in the championship. And when you're leading the championship, you're in a much more powerful position to do what you want.
No doubt. Jonathan, I'd like to put some journalistic curiosity here. You talked a lot about 2021 right now. It was a season for the history. We had an intense battle with Max and Lewis. And I would like to ask you to compare how is the journalistic work to do the coverage of an entire F1 season on a season like 2021, that we have a fight that goes down to the end, and another like 2023, in which Max absolutely dominated, winning 19 out of 22 races. How different is it for you guys that work around full-time in the paddock, that follows every race? How different it is to do the work in seasons that are completely different?
I think that they're both what I would call challenging, but for completely different reasons. So the challenge of a season like 23 and potentially the end of 22, when one driver's winning all the time, the challenge is to find stories, because it can be quite boring if the same driver's winning. It gets hard to explain why he's won for the 5th race running and why he's won by 20 seconds. And we live in a business where we want more readers and we want more people to read our stories, and you want to get a bigger profile. And if interest in the sport's dropping and the readers aren't there and the stories aren't there, it gets much more difficult to find stuff. So it can be a big challenge to cover a season like 2023 when it's not as exciting. Even though I think Formula One's such a great sport because there's always the driver market, soap opera. There's always team boss politics. There's always technical intrigue. So I think there's enough to bubble away, but it can get challenging when the on-track racing's not as good. But the challenge, I think, in a season like 21, and I think like we're getting now, because I see a lot of similarities now to the end of 21 and what we're getting this season, is trying to plot it in a way where you don't get biased towards one camp or the other. And for all the accusations that are thrown at, British media or Dutch media, or that everyone only reports on what their driver's doing, so to speak, I don't think it's as simple as that. I think some journalists, some countries are very much focused on what they're doing. But I think a lot of people in the paddock, have been around long enough. They're not fan obsessed with one driver over the other. They just want to see things done in the right way. But you're trying to report stuff and cover it in a very balanced and fair way, which can be quite challenging when, technical accusations. So we had Red Bull accusing McLaren of the mini DRS. You then got McLaren with Red Bull's front bib adjuster. So all these stories are floating around. You've got drivers, Lando and Max don't see eye to eye on driving standards. Zach Brown and Christian Horner see things totally differently. So the challenge is to cover it in a way that's as impartial as it can be, because as human beings, it's impossible to be completely 100% impartial. So it's foolish to think, there isn't some human interpretation of what's happening and judgments on certain things and what should be discounted and what is relevant. But I think it's really, really important that you try just to report what is happening. Don't try to take sides. Don't try to kind of say this person's definitely right and this person's definitely wrong. You just report this is happening, this is why it's happening, and then try and let the readers, make their own opinion. Some readers will be swayed by the facts. Others will just be completely, no, Lando's definitely 100% wrong and weak, or no, Max is definitely 100% wrong and shouldn't be like this. But we try to play it as impartial as possible and try to cover it fairly. Because if you just report what's happening, then that's as much as you can do, really.
And focusing now on McLaren and Lando, do you think Lando lacks aggressiveness to fight against Max for a world title?
I think the difficulty for Lando is that he's coming from so far back in the points terms that it puts the power in Max's hands, because Max can afford for them both to crash, which I think is in the middle part of the season, I would say, in which I think he was behind in the points, but McLaren already had a better car. But I think what McLaren's gone through a learning process to learning how to win again in Formula One, and I don't think it's appreciated just how hard it is to come out on top in Formula One. That it's very rare you get a car that's half a second, 1 second faster. You kind of rock up, go out the pits on Friday, and it's really, really easy, and you just drive around as you want to drive around, and you come home and you're 30 seconds in the lead. That's brilliant, and that's really, really easy way to win a race. But that's not modern Formula One, and we've got differences of hundredths of a second between grid positions and tenths of a second between rows in qualifying. So you've got to eke out every single bit you can get, and your mistakes. If you're fighting for 6th and 7th and make a run wide off the track or a pit stop slightly slow, and you lose 6th place and drop to 7th, we probably don't notice. It doesn't get picked up, doesn't get obsessed over. But when you're fighting for the race win, these details matter. And when you're fighting for the race win, you're going up against better opposition who aren't making these mistakes. So your mistakes are more costly. And I think that's the process that McLaren's been through to learn how to win again, learning about aggressive strategies, learning about getting the pit stops right, learning about how to handle starts, learning about how to handle team orders. And I think Lando's had to go through this process too of learning how to race against a rival who is prepared to get their elbows out and learn. And I think we are seeing, signs of more aggression now from Lando. He moved under braking in Austin at turn 1. So just to show he's not being messed around and leaving doors open. I think in Mexico, we saw, he was willing to, 1 week after Austin, go around the outside of Max and keep his foot in this time and stick it there. So I think he's having to learn to become more aggressive. And, that may be a different Lando from what it was in Austria, for example, or maybe a different Lando from how it was definitely at the start of the season. But this is part of a process he's got to go through. But I think the difficulty is now tempering that aggression against the championship fight, being well aware that if you're coming from behind, it's always much harder to go in and not go in and feel I've got nothing to lose, because it's everything to lose, because the championship could be gone.
And Red Bull's drop of performance, how much Adrian Newey departing explains that?
I think part of it. I think some of the problems were inherent in this car, and I think it may take hours and hours and hours of analysis after the season just to kind of plot why things happened the way they did this year and what happened. Did Red Bull, because Red Bull was so dominant last year, were all their developments all kind of rolled over and kept in their back pocket, and they unleashed them at the start of this season, so their car made the big step, whereas the others were developing, so didn't have much left in their pocket. And if you get close to the limit of these regulations, then it's easy for the others to catch up, because their developments are then coming and being delivered. Because we see some clear steps. Miami, McLaren made that step. Red Bull seemed to lose the balance. Was it because they were pushing the car harder, exposed some weaknesses? But they've drifted down over the season. Red Bull will claim Newey's departure had nothing to do with it, that they're already in trouble in Miami and Adrian was still there in Miami. But you don't hire someone as expensive as Adrian Newey with all that genius and brilliance. He doesn't have a positive impact on the team. So I think losing him, may have lost a bit of direction. And it doesn't take much. We're only talking 1/10 of a second per lap, or a race setup, or something adjusting the tyre temperatures or the tyre degradation. And that's the difference between battling for a podium and finishing 4th, 5th or 6th. So I think it's a factor, but I think it'd be wrong to call it the factor in why their season's taken a turn.
And what are the other factors, apart from the rivals getting closer and closer?
Yeah, I think there's the combination of, I think the cost cap is biting, because teams are heavily restricted on developments. And if you've had a season of big crashes like Red Bull have had with Sergio, then this all has an impact on development. So you've got that. I think the aero testing restrictions are probably biting teams a lot harder. And if you think at the mid stage of this season, Red Bull was still P1, so had the least amount of wind tunnel development. McLaren were P3, so have had the most since. So I think it'd be interesting to know, what these differences are, and are these now making the difference? So maybe we'll only get the answers next year. If Red Bull finishes this season 3rd in the Constructors' Championship because Ferrari and McLaren have finished ahead of them, and then they return next year and are doing really, really well, and the others are struggling, will that give us the answer this season? Is it down to, is the ATR actually working because it's shuffling the order around and really helping the team that finishes 3rd? And will we then get into a situation where teams start gaming the system, that actually you target finishing 3rd on where the cutoff point is in the summer, because then you get such better development that you can carry through to the end of the season. Because this is the sort of detail that teams will have engineers deployed to, where should we finish in the Constructors' Championship at the midpoint of the season to guarantee our position at the end of the year. So that's biting. And I think these cars, this current generation of ground effect cars, are so difficult and complicated to understand that they operate in a world of 1 or 2 millimeters of ride height. If you get the aero loading wrong, the suspension kinematics wrong, the tires aren't in the right temperature window, or they're in the wrong window at the front and in the right window at the back, everything changes so much. I think the whole packages are too sensitive. So I think we've ended up in a scenario where teams, you take a wrong path, as Red Bull did in Imola. It's really hard to rein yourself back. It's taken Ferrari from Spain really until kind of Italy to recover where they were. It may have come too late for them to win the championship. It may not have come too late for them to win the championship.
Yeah.
We can find out. But I think it shows, Mercedes is another classic example. Start the year struggling, find this upgrade that they win 3 out of 4 races before the summer break. It all looks like they're going to be the ones, dark horse of the championship. And they fall off a cliff after the summer.
It's interesting, this roller coaster that the teams are living right now. You can start the season so well, like Red Bull did, and then have such a big drop. Mercedes started behind, great 4 seasons before the summer break, and then drop again. It's really interesting because it brings out the unexpected. Now, we don't have something so determined like we had in 2021, which was Mercedes and Red Bull. Nobody came close. Now we have 4 teams winning races, 6 drivers winning more than 1 race. The unpredictability is one of the nicest factors of this season, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. There's nothing better than going to a Formula One race, not knowing who's, not only which driver's not going to win, but which team is going to win. And I think if you're any of even Mercedes now, I think you go to any of those 8 drivers will go to a Grand Prix from Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, with the belief that if we get this weekend absolutely nailed, we can win. And I think that's a fantastic position for Formula One to be in. Because there's times where, end of last year, where you knew Max Verstappen was going to win the race. The question was who was going to finish second, and second's nowhere near as exciting to have a debate over as that fight for first. So for some reason, we've ended up in a Formula One where it is very, very small, where small factors are playing a big role, even track characteristics, and downforce levels, and lots of elements are swinging things around. I just hope that, I think next year will be the same story. I just hope 26 doesn't blow the whole thing wide open with new regulations and we go back to what it was before.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. We are about a year, 3 months away from 2026. How is the talk in the paddock? Are the teams excited or are they anxious, nervous about these new regulations?
It's mostly been a little bit kind of negative, I think, so far on 2026. Because I think we've ended up in a situation, I think even the FI will admit this, we've got this new engine formula where 50% power is coming from the battery,
yes,
roughly 50%, 50% from the ICE, which basically isn't going to deliver you the kind of sustained power levels we have at the moment. So we've had to compromise on car aerodynamics because you need to reduce the drag so the cars aren't too slow on the straights. So you're already starting off, before you've even started the regulations, you're starting off with compromised cars to try to solve the problem that the engines aren't actually perfect for Formula One. And that's caused lots of problems. So we had concerns about downforce levels and the cars. Early analysis of the rules that were presented in Canada suggested, cars are going to be slower than Formula 2 in corners. Quick on the straights, but much, much slower in the corners. So there's been a step now, some changes made to improve them. So I think they're now currently 1 to 2 seconds slower than the current cars. But I'm sure teams, we always hear these predictions, and the teams do a much better job, so they'll catch up. But I think the big uncertainty is what these new hybrid engines are going to be like. Because if that becomes if we shift towards a kind of an economy formula where looking after the battery becomes the predominant key to success, rather than we all love wheel-to-wheel action and fighting and overtaking and drivers pushing super, super hard. And we didn't remember the start of 2014 when these new hybrids came in with 100 kilo limits of fuel, and it was really boring racing because people hadn't learned properly about how to kind of get the fuel levels correct. So they turned into economy runs. Formula One shouldn't be economy run. It should be flat out wheel-to-wheel, drivers attacking as much as they can as possible. So I just hope the engine regulations in 26 allow this to happen.
So your recommendation is to enjoy 2025 as much as possible, John?
You should always enjoy current Formula One as much as possible. Although it's interesting, a friend used to say to me that people love moaning about current Formula One, that current Formula One is always the worst thing possible. It was always better before. But I think this year is actually proving to be an opposite, because I don't think we've had as good a season for genuine reasons. I mean, we had that season where I think we had 7 different winners from the first 7 races.
2012.
Yeah, when Pirelli first came in. But I think that was more kind of teams not understanding cars and tyres and tactics, and it was more as a consequence of uncertainty. Whereas we're getting different winners now because it is just close and it's fantastic, and it's down to a development war, and it's down to teams making missteps or getting things right or pushing on, or drivers making mistakes or drivers getting it right. It's a much more consistent basis to which they are delivering these results. So I think F1 right now is kind of perhaps potentially one of the best eras we've ever had.
That's interesting. And specifically for 2025, do you have any guess in terms of teams hierarchy, or just continuing what's currently happening?
I think that I can't imagine there'll be a massive revolution, because teams can start their aero work on 26 on January the 1st next year. And I think they're already quite mindful of switching resource. Plus, with the cost cap, no team will want to come up with an all-new chassis and design and anything for next year. So it will be evolution, but that doesn't mean you can't bring steps and upgrades. But I think the fact that this season has been so close and teams are bringing developments and new parts at this stage, because a lot of times you get to post-summer break and people will stop and turn off, and all that work then carries in. So I think we'll end up viewing 25 as 24 and 25 will be the same season in effect, except the points will reset in the middle, which I think will be fascinating, because what can Max Verstappen hold on till the end of this championship? Because it's a title won by him being dominant at the start of the season and pulling off results in a stage where his car wasn't good enough, that not many drivers would have been able to do. You've got that, but then at the start of next year, that buffer won't be there anymore, and you won't have this points buffer. So can Red Bull turn it around? Because there's a danger they finish this season as the 3rd quickest team, and it's going to be quite hard to throw everything at that, and a new car for 26, and preparations to become your own engine manufacturer as well. So their biggest challenge is around the corner at a time when they need to knuckle down and not ride off 25 as well.
That leads us to Max's future. Changing teams. What do you think?
Going after Adrian on Aston Martin?
I think Max, as we discussed about his attitude on track, about how he approaches racing rules, is only focused on winning. I think that'll be the same for his team choice too. I think everything will be dictated by where he sees his best chance of winning races. There is no option to go to McLaren because Lando and Oscar are nailed down, so you can't go there. Ferrari have got Leclerc and Hamilton, so that basically his only real potential options are
Mercedes
and Aston Martin. At the moment, it wouldn't make any sense for him to think, for next year, for example. I know he's racing on, but you wouldn't look to think either of those looks a better proposition for 25. And then for 26, you'll almost be taking a gamble to work out where the land's going to lie, because no one knows who's going to hit the ground running in 2026. There'll be engine figures floating around on power, but there's going to be a difference between how much power your engine's performing versus how it actually delivers that performance around a racing lap. You don't know the aero figures for the teams. So I think Max, probably will get to the end of 26, unless we get to the middle of next year and Red Bull go, our engine is a complete disaster, we're going to be 5 seconds off the pace. Then I think you might see some movement, but I don't think that will happen. The investment they've made and the people they've got in, I think they'll be there. But I think Max, if Red Bull have a poor season at any point, then I wouldn't imagine him sticking around for very long to kind of see it come through the other end. That would be the point he goes, I'm off. And he'll go to the best team he can be possible. All he cares about is winning. You got to remember that.
And it's a different scenario compared to 2013, for example, in which Lewis changed McLaren for Mercedes? Because I believe in the paddock, people knew that Mercedes would have the best project, maybe. It's not the case right now for 2026, or is there any comparison?
No, I think Lewis's decision was made in 2012 in effect.
Yeah.
And there was also the background to kind of McLaren and it not delivering the championships he had hoped for, and his belief on the future, and a stage in his career where he felt he needed a change as well. I think Max has changed a lot at Red Bull. He's grown an awful lot, and I think even this year he's matured a great deal, especially off track. Deals with things in a better way, deals with the media in a much better way. Deals with frustrations like the swearing controversy in Singapore in a better way. I mean, I thought how he handled that protest was perfect.
Yes.
Made his point to the FIA, didn't annoy the journalists, didn't do anything outside the rule book, kept those people who need to keep happy were kept happy, and he showed people he was annoyed. So it was handled in a statesman-like way almost, which Max of 2015, 2016 probably wouldn't have done things that way. So he's come on a lot, but I think he's just a simple winning machine. He wants to just be in a place that he rocks up, jumps in that car on the Friday, does his job, wins the race on Sunday, and leaves. I don't think there's any more complications or any other circumstance he wants around that. That's all he wants, and then he can leave the race on the Sunday night, go and win a few sim races during the week. Come back on the next Thursday, go off and win another race. I think Max is just this machine that just loves winning.
A racing machine, like Fernando, maybe.
Yeah, in effect.
But thinking about Max's perspective, John, are those issues with Horner from the beginning of the year already in the past, do you think?
I think for Max...
because Max wasn't there, but Jos and Helmut.
Yeah, but I think Max is trapped. Max, I think, sometimes found himself kind of stuck between two places because obviously his dad and Christian don't see eye to eye and view things very, very differently. And Max, has had a great deal of success from Red Bull. Christian Horner's been the architect of that success. He's come in, he's made that team one of the very, very best in F1 history, truly dominant. But equally, so there's a loyalty there that Max has got. But equally, Max has got loyalties to his dad who's brought him on and he's very close to him. So I think, Max found it difficult dealing with that politically at the start of the year. But I go back to my previous answer. Max is a winning machine that I think he would go to a team that was most turbulent, political, troublesome off the circuit if it guaranteed him a car that was half a second quicker than anybody else. And I think that's all ultimately he cares about. He doesn't, all these side issues and stuff aren't of relevance to him. He just wants to go out there, do the job of being a racing driver, show that in his head he's the best racing driver there's ever been in Formula One, and win races and win some more races and keep winning races until the day he thinks I'm bored of winning races, and then he'll go off and he'll win races in other categories.
Yeah, that's interesting.
John, going back to the 2025 expectations, I think all eyes on the paddock and the fans will be looking towards the new partnership of Hamilton and Ferrari. How do you think we're going to have in terms of intern dynamics? Because we have Charles, who is a Ferrari protege, who is there from the beginning, who has a long-term contract against a 7-time world champion, one of the truly greatest in history. How do you see Ferrari next year?
And Lewis's character in Ferrari will be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination.
I think it's a big challenge for Lewis because he's almost out of a comfort zone and into a completely fresh environment where he's not a total outsider, but he is coming from outside into somewhere that can be quite difficult to plot and navigate and can be quite political internally. British engineers have had this problem of going into Ferrari and it not clicking because just the history and the way things work there. And obviously Charles is the incumbent. Charles is young. He's very, very quick. He's exceptionally quick in qualifying, which has been a weakness of Lewis's in this ground effect era. I think he struggles with these to get the most out of these tyres. So he's going to be up against it. But I think the fact that Ferrari are finishing this season looking like the car's going in the right direction, I think is a boost, because I think if we'd gone into next year and Ferrari were fourth or fifth quickest team and it was all really, really difficult and the team was in a big mess, then I think it would be much more difficult for kind of Lewis to cope with that and find his feet and go up against Charles. Much more complications. But if the car's going well and that team's all unified and pulling in the right direction as it seems to be under Fred Vasseur, it makes his job good. And I think things are eased by having Fred there, who is known for a long time. He's raced with in the past. Fred understands Ferrari politics, but he's, you know, what we call a racer at heart, understands racing teams and what's needed. And I think Lewis will thrive in it. I think, you know, all of us in our lives sometimes just need to change and need to do something differently. Need to, you know, get out of that comfort zone and go and do something to push ourselves and find the limit. And maybe Lewis has just found that limit of what he can do at Mercedes, that they can't, you know, sometimes it gets hard to, you know, when you've been at a team for so long, to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper to find things. So I think he will thrive. I think there will be challenges, and it may not all be easy and as rosy as he may like, but I know I'm looking forward to it. And I think everyone in Formula One is looking forward to it. And I think the hype around Lewis Hamilton and the Ferrari will just, you know, elevate Formula One to another level.
Yeah, that's important, especially when you're not sure about what the new regulations will do to the series. But how much of Andrea Kimi Antonelli is there in Lewis's change to Ferrari? Do you see any links? Because Toto always talks about how much he didn't want to lose Andrea. And of course, there was a 1+1 contract between Lewis and Mercedes in this last deal. Is there any connections, or just betting on a new project with a big brand such as Ferrari?
I mean, Lewis could have stayed at Mercedes. He had the option to, the contract was there to stay. He activated the exit clause to leave. And I think if Lewis was staying, you know, Antonelli would probably be doing a second season in Formula 2. I don't think there would have been a rush to get him up. But
they didn't know that his season in Formula 2 would be so difficult.
No, but I think because it's been a difficult season, I think that would have allowed them time to give him another plan. But, you know, when Lewis sat down on that sofa at Toto's house in Oxford in January, February, I can't remember the exact day, and told him he was leaving, you know, instantly Toto's mindset was on, okay, Antonelli may be the man to come in. And I think Antonelli, you know, it's been, Formula 2 this season has been really difficult to judge. And I think Colapinto shows us the difficulties that, you know, before the Italian Grand Prix, you know, if people were asked to rank their top Formula 2 drivers, I'm sure many people's lists wouldn't have included Colapinto very high up. Mm-hmm. I think he had one feature race win, but everyone was looking at what Behrman was doing and what Antonelli was doing, and, you know, having all those F1 links. And now Colapinto, suddenly everyone's talking about him in Formula One, and, you know, he's linked to Red Bull, he's linked to RB, he's linked to Sauber. So I think F2's just been really, really difficult to judge where people are at, which would have given Mercedes the means to just give Kimi another season, because he's not getting too old to have another season in Formula 2. But once they started testing him, evaluating him, seeing the progress, I think it became a no-brainer for them.
And why not Carlos Sainz or Fernando Alonso?
I think in Antonelli, if you speak to, you know, I've sat down with Toto plenty of times, and he raves about Antonelli like he doesn't rave about very many drivers. I think potentially this goes back to him losing Max Verstappen to Red Bull. Yes. Originally. I think he got kind of burned in the past by they didn't want to put Max into a Mercedes F1 seat, didn't feel that it was the right time to do it. Red Bull could give him the Toro Rosso drive, did. and history was made, for Red Bull. So feeling burned by that, I think Toto didn't want to see this opportunity go by. And, he talks just endless brilliant stories about Antonelli being seconds a lap quicker than drivers in a wet test at Silverstone F3 last winter, and a GT test at Imola at the start of this year where, Toto had crashed the car and was, during his own practice, and was all kind of bandaged up with masking tape and fixed in this thing. And then Antonelli goes out and smashes the lap record in this beaten up old car. And they see the tests. And even Monza, when 10 minutes, Antonelli puts in the barriers at Parabolica, is pushing far too hard. But equally, some of those speeds he was doing in those early laps were phenomenal. I think it shows that the talent is there. It just needs reining in. And I think Toto probably feels it's better to have someone who's pushing too hard, too quick. We can pull them back, and it'll be better than playing it safe with someone who maybe needs pushing on a little bit more to be quicker. So I think for the future, it makes sense. Maybe we'll get to next summer and they're onto their fourth chassis because they've all been smashed up and the constructors' points aren't going well, and Toto's defending him even more, and then there might be have we made a mistake here? But sometimes you've got to take the exciting choices, and sometimes you've got to take the gamble and a little bit of a risk. But ask Toto whether it was a gamble. He took Antonelli. He says not at all. He says we know how quick he is. It's just now up to us to manage it and get the most out of him.
Jonathan, you actually said the word gamble, and I think it's interesting because it seems that we have a mentality change in the paddock because rookies are in again. They are a hot commodity. Again, we have Andrea, we have Behrman, Lawson coming back. Duhan confirmed for next year. What changed? Because
and maybe Franco, Gabriel Bortoletti.
Oh, yes. Because from 23 to 24, we had, for the first time in history, the same grid unchanged from one season to another. And now we have the rookies are coming back again. What changed? Why do are suddenly back in?
I think this is one of the endless cycles you get in Formula One, for example, that you go through phases where a good crop of drivers, a generation of good drivers come through, and because they're good, they keep their seats. So it kind of blocks out a chance for the rookies. So you have this cycle of drivers that are going through, and at the moment, we've got a gaggle of like Norris, Russell, Albon, even Leclerc, who've kind of come through the ranks together and will go on. But then some other drivers are kind of disappear off, for instance, which opens doors and at random moments. And I think, Behrman in Saudi Arabia, amazing job to have got dumped into a car on a Saturday. Well, it was a Friday morning, so I think it started a bit earlier because of the time to the weekend, but dumped in for final practice to then finish in the points on Sunday on a challenging track like that was phenomenal.
Isn't that a trap? It happened with Nick de Vries in the Italian Grand Prix in 2022.
Potentially, but I think it kind of woke people up. And then the Antonelli thing happened, and then Piastri doing so well. But I think the elements are that simulators now have got really, really important. So young drivers can come in and are much, much better prepared than they've ever been in the past with setups and understandings and systems and what's needed and tyres and everything. It's no longer a case of your first laps in a Formula One car are, oh my God, this is shocking. The fact that Antonelli can come out the pits at Monza and is putting his left wheels onto the grass under braking for the first chicane because he's pushing so hard straight away, I think says a lot about how well prepared these drivers are. So you've got the simulator fact. And I think you've got a generation of cars also that are certainly tricky in qualifying to take it to the limit and get the best out of the peak grip. But I think in the races themselves, actually driving, and Fernando Alonso explained this recently, that driving at 90% is actually the best way. The cars just like it. They're more comfortable. They're happier. They're much more stable. You can get much more out of them, which he thinks is a great equalizer for experience versus the youngsters. So you haven't got an era like the mid-90s, for example, where it was with refueling, it was maximum push qualifying laps for 50, 60 laps on a Sunday. Now it's a much different ebb and flow to a weekend where teams are more prepared, the simulator's more prepared, the cars are potentially more forgiving. And good rookie drivers means teams are more encouraged to take risks on other good rookie drivers and become a fashion. And I'm sure, these rookie drivers will come in, will all do well, and will block out now for the next few years, the next generation of rookie drivers. So it's just kind of an ebb and flow of Formula One as things happen. I'm sure in 5 years' time, when this current crop have all got experienced and Fernando finally maybe retires, or Lewis is gone, some of these more experienced drivers have kind of moved on. The next generation will come through and they'll be back to, look at all these youngsters coming up.
That's interesting. But a good rookie carries momentum for another good rookie to come in. But thinking about Brazilians, we were talking about some of them before recording, John. Your relationship with Brazilian drivers in these Formula One years of yours, Rubens, Felipe, even others such as Felipe Massa and the ones from the start of the 2000s. Good memories.
They've always been great. I think a lot of them, Rubens obviously came through British racing scene a bit as well. So I think they understand kind of the European racing scene a lot, which I think then kind of embeds them in the paddock quite well. Rubens and Felipe. I mean, Rubens always used to send me a text on Christmas Day, just wishing you and your family best for Christmas, or that sort of thing. It was always, happy, friendly, smiley, good bloke, even in the difficult times. And Felipe the same. I mean, I think a lot of it's also to do with the kind of the environment they're in. It's obviously difficult to get to know these people when they're inside someone like Ferrari. Big team, a lot of control over kind of what they're doing. Difficult to get access to them. But often it's afterwards you get to know them. And Rubens and that brawn, was fantastic, because in a small team, obviously was important for him to kind of stake his claim and position a lot of times. It was difficult with the focus being a lot on Jensen. I think so. He knows how to kind of play the paddock game, and if you're nice to, I think there's also a truth in the paddock that some drivers don't realise this, but if you're nice to journalists and treat them well, then the days you kind of need them for a bit of help, because either you've messed up and you don't want to be slated for it, or just need a bit of nudge, then it does pay off in the end. So they play the political game as much as the team bosses sometimes.
And drivers from the current grid, which are the best ones to deal with, or the worst?
If you want to say the other side.
I mean, I always, because access these days access gets harder and harder a lot of the times. Go back to 2008, the championship finale. One of my memories is at the time that it wasn't organised sessions with drivers. You just walked up and down the paddock and spoke to them. And I just grabbed Seb Vettel in the race because he'd overtaken Lewis at one point very close to the end of the race. And I just remember chatting to him just by ourselves, getting a story from him face to face, because that's how it was done, even as recent as then. Whereas now it's very strictly controlled in a media pen. So you get 2-3 minutes crammed around, lots of people, quite difficult sometimes. But you can also tell a lot of who's switched on, willing to give you answers. So, Fernando Alonso is always brilliant to me, because I think he's the master politician sometimes, of just getting his message across when he needs to get it across, playing the game to be a smart cookie. I recall in Austin when he'd had the bust up with Lawson on Saturday. So they had the row after sprint race. Then in qualifying, he'd come out the pits and started messing about with Lawson. And we asked him, so what happened with Lawson? And he shrugged his shoulders, like all innocent. What do you mean? And then we talked about the weaving with Lawson out the pits. He said, oh no, I was on scrub tyres, so I just needed to get some heat into them, just to completely make it as though this was an inconsequence, which reminded me of Indy 2007 when he was waving his fist at the pit wall because they wouldn't move Lewis aside. And then he was asked afterwards, and he claimed that it's because his overalls were dirty and he's trying to get some dirt off them. So he's always, I think, always enjoyable speaking to Fernando because every answer's, there's meaning behind every answer. He's not going through the motions. He's either telling you his truth, he's telling you
his truth. He's
telling you his truth, or he's telling you the truth, or he's telling you a truth that you need to go and find out, and I'll give you a clue to go and find it. And he always trying to. So I think he's always fun to deal with. Then there are drivers, like Albon, Leclerc, Sainz, George, who will talk and give you details and explain everything, just as is, completely friendly. They're all fine. And then some, Lewis, can be up and down because I think, he wears his heart on his sleeve. If he's had a good race, chatty and great. If it's had a terrible qualifying or terrible thing, then you can tell he's not engaged and his head's somewhere else. So it's a shame we only get to speak to him now in those kind of minutes after he's got out of the car, because when it used to be, things had calmed down, had been through engineering and you spoke to him afterwards, he was much, much better because I think all the emotions had gone away. So I think sometimes we don't get the drivers in the best kind of location and time of day to get the most out of them. But Lewis generally, on a Thursday, for example, often engaging, often great answers, often in a brilliant mood and knows exactly, asking the right question, you'll get the right answer.
John, at the start of this talk, you talked about your favorite tracks, Interlagos, Spa, Silverstone from the old days, but let's put it on the other side of the table. Right now we have the biggest Formula One calendar of all times, 24 races. There has to be some Grand Prix that you really don't like because of the track, because of the city. Which one or bottom three would you put there?
Bottom three is difficult. Some of the...
It doesn't have to be from the current calendar.
No, some of them are... I think a lot of what I often classify the races, some races fall into what I call high maintenance and some races fall into low maintenance. Because some are really easy to get to, easy media facilities, not much kind of extra hassle to get the weekend rolling with good paddock, and then everything's much easier. Some places are really difficult to get to. Brazil's not easy to get to. Yeah. So I classify Brazil as a high maintenance, but Brazil makes up for it because it's got a great track and it's a great city. But for example, Sochi, for example, would have been one of the ones that falls towards the bottom because it's always a pain to get to because it would take, it's not very far, but not many direct flights. So you'd often have to transfer through Istanbul or Moscow at silly times of the day. So you'd always be completely tired. And then where the track wasn't particularly well prepared for Formula One because restaurants take 4 hours to bring food if there was any food available. And then it's difficult because then the visas to sort out and very difficult. And the track itself wasn't great as well. So when a high maintenance Grand Prix also falls into the track's not fantastic, that then shuffles it down the order. Baku, for example, is what I call Baku's a high maintenance race because it's as difficult to get to as Sochi because there's one direct flight that flies at the wrong time of day. So you've got to connect through somewhere at silly hours. Busy city, always a hassle trying to argue with the taxi drivers at the airport to get the right fare to drop you into the city. But Baku saves itself because actually I quite like the track.
The races there are good.
So there's always these shuffling factors of the high maintenance places, which normally involve visas and travel hassle and difficult cities and staying far from the track, which can unfortunately cloud what they are. And things also, these days, for example, Australia used to be an absolutely fantastic Grand Prix. Alpart's a great track. Melbourne's a great city. You'd finish quite early in the day, dinner in St Kilda in the evenings, so really, really nice. Then this Liberty Media trend to pushing races later and later in the day. So sessions are now finishing at 5, 6, 7 o'clock. So you work now till 9 o'clock, by which time it's too late to go out. So So basically then where you are is irrelevant. Doesn't matter how good the restaurants are or the places you're at. It doesn't really matter.
You can enjoy.
You go back to your hotel. And then because it's so busy with traffic in the morning or the time zone's wrong, you're up early at 6 and start work again. So it's just it changes all around. I wouldn't say there's any Grand Prix I absolutely dread to go to and completely hate and think it's all terrible. But it's where they shuffle. The high maintenance ones need to be like Interlagos and have a good track.
Yeah, Interlagos is one of the enjoyable Grand Prix.
Yes.
Then.
High maintenance but enjoyable.
Yeah, that's good. John, I'd like to thank you for your visit, the chat. It was very nice. And we will be inviting you for the next years as well.
Fantastic. I look forward to being here.
Thank you. Obrigado, Guilherme. Galera, entrevista especialíssima com o Jonathan Nubble, editor de Fórmula 1 em nível global do Motorsport.com e Autosport. Você que está com a gente, não se esqueça de se inscrever e ativar as notificações, que aí você não perde o alerta desse tipo de papo muito especial. Deixa o like e a gente se vê na próxima. Tchau, tchau.